Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Reigniting Small Business. I'm Laura Richards here today with Patrick Lee of Spark Business Institute, and we're talking about how the adoption of technology by small businesses has been accelerated by the pandemic. Hey, Patrick.
Hello and happy April Fool's Day.
Thank you.
It's an official holiday now.
Well, at least you're not pranking me on live casting. I appreciate that.
Sure. So let's set the stage again. I mean, we've talked about this stuff a lot, obviously, but let's just refresh. How important is small business to the American economy? Small businesses employ about 85 million Americans and contribute about 6 trillion to the American economy. So during the pandemic and the subsequent shutdown, we saw the impact, right? Because small businesses were affected dramatically. I think the stat right now is 1 in 5 have shuttered either temporarily or permanently. That may be an undercount at this point. And the amount of layoffs that occurred during all this, it's a huge impact. But one of the things that came out of this whole thing is that those who embraced innovation, especially in technology, benefited greatly. And so this topic, I think, is very pertinent because we all feel like we're coming out of this now. But who learned what from this, and how did technology play a role, and what's going to stick?
Yeah, I think it's such, it makes sense. We had social distancing, stay-at-home orders, capacity limitations, people closed their brick and mortar operations altogether. And so it's natural that these owners turn to technology to figure out how to reach their consumers and even possibly, in some cases, grow their business, and market their products. So in many cases, this led to them to actually have to change their business model. And one of the places that comes to mind in my local area is Zachary's Jewelers. So here's this jewelry store who, last March before the shutdown, they were rolling out a huge promotion in time for the St. Patrick's Day parade that took over their windows, and it had gold and was very catchy and bling bling and kind of looked like The Price is Right. They were doing something to get a lot of foot traffic in. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic, this isn't happening. And they pivoted so quickly. They took their website, they started doing live in-person showings and personal shopping. And so for a very high-end jewelry store to take people on this journey, it made sense for what they do, and it allowed them to continue to connect with people and sell jewelry during the pandemic.
And that's fascinating because I think that, a lot of the technologies and opportunities that we've seen small businesses take advantage of because they had to have existed for a while. But when you think about it, we all get in our patterns, and when am I going to have time to investigate that and try to do that? And you just keep doing your thing. Plus, if you think about it, the variety of technology and solutions, it's overwhelming. How do you know which ones to look at, and how do you do that all while trying to keep things going? So I think, what this did was it forced change, and by forcing change, people had to get comfortable with this technology, and then also forced certain technologies to either put up or shut up, right? So we started seeing what did work. It's not like, there were people who innovated quickly, and then there were people who just copied those innovations, right? You see that throughout the restaurant thing, like, okay, well, they're doing that, we're going to do that. It's the forcing of that is probably a good thing. I think the data that has been gathered from that, we may think we're going back to, okay, now all that's gone, we're back to the way it was. No, that's going to change how people do business, and it's going to influence things. And so what worked and what didn't, and how this begins to mesh will be extremely, I think, interesting. So, when we look at some of that, it's easy for us to think of technology from the standpoint of software, computers, virtual space and all. But we saw some interesting things too. Like we actually already talked about this, but we had a guest on who her innovations were technological, but not computer based. It was in her office. She took the latest technology that killed viruses, moved air, did all that stuff to make her space super safe for people to still come into, right? Well, she's not going to get rid of that. So, is that now a flu-free zone, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what does that also lead to? So I think McKinsey had a study that said that restaurants and retailers that invested in technology and digital solutions fared far better than those that did not during the shutdown. It seems like an obvious statement of fact, but I think that proof is going to drive a lot of things in the recovery period too.
You're absolutely right. Think about it. People are online buying everything from, toothpaste to dinner, to art. A lot of artists during the pandemic have put their art online for the very first time. People that never had an Etsy shop, have created their own website and they're advertising it through local Facebook groups. So there's all different folks out there. But back to what you were talking about, as far as the restaurant industry, delivery has become a lifeline for restaurants and grocery stores, with 81% reporting that they would have had to lay off staff if it wasn't for third-party delivery services, and 75% reporting that they would have had to close their business altogether without these delivery services. So that idea of technology as a lifeline, it bears out in the statistics.
And we backing it up even further. A Verizon business survey found that 43% of small businesses plan on expanding their businesses through digital and related technologies as a response to COVID-19. 30% have already added ways to deliver products and services digitally. So, it's almost a given that businesses are always looking at how they're going to grow, how they're going to expand, how things are going to get better. And so even though we're hit with this, they quickly, started pivoting to, okay, well, what do we do now? And I think you have an interesting one. I know you went out to dinner recently and experienced how a change in what they were doing actually may have created something even bigger than they could ever have imagined.
Well, I have, and I think it leads to another subject that we'll have to talk about too, which is, does a change in your business model that creates tremendous success disturb the way you do business when the pandemic is no longer in play and we go back to business as usual? So I'd love to get your opinion on that next. And just a little bit about the story. This is a restaurant that very, very effectively has taken advantage of online ordering and is basically inundated, just totally inundated with, takeout. And so, if you're in the restaurant eating, your food might be delayed because they're taking those orders in order. So at what point does your success become your Achilles heel?
Well, I think, what we're going to see here is, I think folks look at this kind of simplistically, right? We had a shutdown. So we went into hunker down mode, survival mode. What do we need to do to get through this? But once we get through it, we're going to go back to how we were doing it before. And that's not what's going to happen. There's going to be a bunch of changes. Some of the stuff that we learned is going to be kept. Some folks may not go back to what they were doing at all. Some folks are going to go back to it and then discover that the expectations of their clients now is different, and they may have to adapt further because we're back to brick and mortar. And they're like, okay, I like that we're back to brick and mortar, but I also really like the efficiency of how you did business when you weren't brick and mortar. I want that efficiency and the brick and mortar. Okay, well, how do you deliver that, right? So these things are not going to be that simple. It's not just going to be back to business as usual. So those that can integrate and those that have taken the data they've gathered from this and made good decisions, you're gonna see some interesting stuff, I think.
Well, and I think it's pretty notable, and we should definitely point it out, that although we've talked about all of these businesses who have successfully used technology and the percentages, There are still 73% of small businesses who are not aware of the digital resources like online payment processing tools, productivity, tools, e-commerce websites, and online marketing and other tools that can help them reach customers locally and globally. So what I think we're seeing bear out during the pandemic is this, in many cases, is the difference between businesses that are thriving and businesses that are closing.
Well, I think we have to, we didn't just say use technology. We said innovate with technology.
Mhm.
And I think that's a big key, because there's a lot of folks who went into survival mode. And so they said, okay, everybody's using Zoom. We'll try to use Zoom. Okay, everybody's taking orders online and doing curbside, so we'll take orders online and do curbside, right? And so the challenge there was to just stay alive, okay? But we put innovate in front. So that meant not just what is the technology that everybody's using around me to try to cope with this. That meant what can we implement and learn from this that actually provides almost a better service. I mean, in your case, they have streamlined their carryout to a level where they may have to have 2 restaurants. They may have to have their sit down, here's what you do. And then over there is a whole nother operation running so different, because you said your meal was delayed because the carryouts there was so much carryout going on that the kitchen couldn't handle the people sitting in the restaurant now. We're not saying how to use technology to get by. We're saying how to use technology to move your operation forward. So, let's take a look at how some small businesses are harnessing technology and what they've done both as a lifeline and then as possible business model changes, right? So we've got all of the new platforms for conducting business, right? And that's everything from Zoom to e-commerce sites, but also like I had a really interesting thing that I had to do where for my clients, we do a end of year retreat every year. And we're used to getting together and there's either a speaker or there's a set of challenges or teams and games or, something that's kind of cool. And people get used to that. And so we're in December, we're towards the, end of last year. This pandemic's been eating everybody up. And that's something they really want. But how are we going to do it? Because we're not getting together. And all sitting on Zoom yet again doesn't feel like, it's going to be so thrilling. So we found a platform called Let's Roam. And they basically hosted a little mini party with teams, trivia games, and all this stuff going on that allowed us to feel like we were doing this. Great innovation, right? They were real smart. Like, okay, people are, it's almost like taking the escape room concepts and applying them virtually. And we could critique the heck out of it, but it was a great innovation and it worked. We had a great time, and there you go. We also see folks spending a lot more time being willing to take professional development courses. All this, Apple University and all the different, free courses that are out there and how you can go get continuing education and so on. That's been booming, right? And then there's just the whole virtual networking seminars, conversations. I think it was pretty amazing how quickly chambers of commerce adapted to, and there's some that didn't, by the way. I belong to multiple chambers, and there's some that were just so aggressive with how we're going to make this work and how we're going to have people meeting each other and how we're going to do this stuff. And then there are those who just kind of shut down and send out an email every once in a while. Mm-hmm. So, I think you've seen a lot of separation of entities because of their ability to do this. I think there was a stat I saw, like LinkedIn Learning saw like crazy demand for their 16. I think they have like 16,000 free and paid online courses, and it was like overwhelming for them to be able to even deliver what was being requested.
Yeah, so you point to a couple different things there. These learning opportunities that are online are being hugely successful. I'll tell you, I'm taking Italian from Babbel and really enjoying that. Uh, so I think people are harnessing technology as a lifeline socially, like you mentioned, even business networking wise, with also with these learning opportunities that we were talking about. And we had mentioned earlier in the podcast about reduced sales contact. They call that sales friction, where you reduce the amount that you actually interact physically and improve safety. So, like we talked about with, shutting down a brick and mortar, that was to reduce that sales friction. Quickly, we saw some owners implementing optimized e-commerce platforms that allow for the QR code identification, that maybe pull up the menus, also apps for parking and touch-free payment options. And kind of as we talked about earlier in the podcast, it's not that these things didn't exist, they just weren't widespread, but the technology was quickly adapted because it did cut down on this friction that we were talking about.
Well, you saw that whole, we used to be the poetry slams, right? Everybody go to the place and people would get up and they do their poetry. Well, you were talking about art. So my son's getting ready to graduate from art school. And they started using QR codes to do what they call QR clusters. And so you would link the QR code and you put little stickers and they just have some place, almost a graffiti place where all these little stickers are up and you can hit them all and see what they are. And they would be different pieces of art that these students had created and other artists had created. And you can go look at it online, right? And they had it such that you could also interact with it, because right below you could leave your comments. You could be mean, or you could say something nice, or you could do whatever. But it was trying to create that interactive, almost gallery experience. And I thought that was kind of neat that they do that real quick. And and think about this too. I was at a cybersecurity conference in Las Vegas about 2 years ago, and one of the vendors there was Zoom. Okay, it was the Zoom company, and I went up to their booth, and their booth was super cool, and they were showing the technology, not just of what we know of Zoom, but they were showing how they can take offices and make it interactive with pads outside each of the conference rooms, and you could see what things are, and you could look into the room, and like they had all this cool stuff. And I thought, this is such a cool company. Well, who knew that I was going to learn about Zoom firsthand from that point on? And think about that. And we all now know what Zoom is. Everybody knows what Zoom is. But think about the stuff it's been used for, right? I mean, it's quickly adopted by small businesses to, like dog training. We're doing dog training through Zoom, right? Fitness classes, right? And by the way, I like that, because you can quickly turn off the video when you decide you're just going to lay on your back and go, oh God, right? Even doctor's appointments, I just think it's amazing that stuff that we would never even think could work that way worked fine.
Yeah, it's funny. So my daughter got a dog during, like many did, during coronavirus, and she's doing the online dog training, and the trainer shows up. It's just, Opie, her dog, and her, and the
Opie, I like it.
And the trainer can see Opie, doing her thing, and gives my daughter what to work on. And then the next week they go back and they see what they've done. And she says it's very effective. She's really happy with it. Yeah. So in addition to those kinds of services that connect us, we got to look at the ways in which technology platforms help with communication. So really early on in the pandemic, nobody knew if anything was open. So
Yeah.
it'd be like looking around, are you open? And the answer could be different every single day. Businesses didn't really know what was going on, didn't really know what they were doing. So I think we saw lots of folks turn to social media, obviously their websites, but also to social media to help keep customers updated about specials and hours and all that kind of stuff. And we all got trained as consumers to watch our social media feeds. And then you saw these groups spring up. If I haven't already mentioned Annapolis Takeout, some wonderful woman started this in order to only provide positive feedback about restaurant experiences. And it has thousands of members now, and it has shared the good news of, what restaurants have been doing during the pandemic. It's been highly, highly, highly effective. So we've become ambassadors. Everybody that posts to that, you're letting us, showing pictures of your food, letting us know what you liked and you didn't like. That's been working really well for the businesses who've been working that. So interestingly, 40% of small business owners reported using digital tools to find new customers. And that's from the Connected Commerce Council survey.
Yeah, yes, it's not just the customers interacting with the businesses, but it's the businesses like, okay, how do I get into those customers? So, so the thing we already said, the pandemic didn't create the technologies. It just forced the acceleration of adoption of them, of innovation, to use them in ways that I think small businesses always wondered, can this be done without the brick and mortar? Well, I don't know. I don't understand it, so I'm not going to look at it. And I think, this forced that, like we said. So there's a sunny note to all this too, because, we're talking about the businesses closing and the ones in survival mode and all that. But Yelp data currently shows that nearly 500,000 businesses opened during the pandemic. So, the entrepreneurial spirit doesn't die because of COVID, right? And I think people saw a lot of opportunity. And I also think a lot of that was fueled by, as the pandemic dragged on, people looked up and watched how this technology was allowing things to happen and said, you know what? We're going to go for it, even though, maybe this would not normally be the best time, but we can see a way there. So I do think that's an optimistic sign of hopefully good recovery for the U.S. economy. I think I have one more little stat here. Between March 11th, 2020 and March 1st, 2021, Yelp has seen more than 487,500 new businesses listings in the U.S., and that's down just 14% compared with the prior year. And 14% is still down. But when we look at, what we would expect with where we're coming out of and what's happened, I don't know that anyone would expect that any new business would open, right? Like it is, we're lucky that any survived. So I think that's a great sort of positive note to sort of end on there.
I'm going to echo that positive note and say I think we're going to see many more new businesses in the next 12 months. I think that there's a lot more going on, and like you said, harnessing innovation has brought a lot of new businesses to becoming a business. It's easier. There's more tools there. People can reach out and grab them. So
yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for ending on a sunny note on this April Fool's podcast. And thank you all for listening and tuning in, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.